Well, hello, everybody. This is Douglas Allen Frazier with By My Spirit Radio. And we're going to have some fun today. It's not that we don't have fun on other days, but I'm really excited about what I'm going to share with you today. Yesterday was a very unique day in the sense that there was a sharing in our congregation by one of the members of our congregation about an experience, a lifetime experience. I really believe it was one of those experiences that you just have to expect the unexpected. I'll put it this way. A number of years ago, we had some really hot weather here in Texas. I mean, it was hot. And the plants were not doing well, the grass was not doing well, and even a lot of the animals were not doing well. We were in a drought condition and it was hot. And I went up to a local store. I stopped. I went in and I got myself a bottle of water. And when I came back out to my truck, I looked around and I saw a butterfly flying very close to my truck, just kind of going up and down and around the truck. And I sat there with my door open, and all of a sudden, this butterfly sat in my hand. And I'm going, wow, look at that. One of God's little creatures interacting with me, another one of God's created beings. But I never had a butterfly come and land on my hand and just stay there. And as I sat there with the butterfly on my hand, I wondered, I said, I wonder if this butterfly is thirsty. And I said, well, let's see what happens. So I took some of my water and poured it into the palm of my hand, and sure enough, that butterfly sat in my hand. Its little proboscis came out into the water and it began to drink. And I just sat there. I put a little bit more water in there and I just sat there. I guess it got to the point where it had fueled up, filled up, and was ready to move on to the next place in its life, and it flew off. But I've thought about that many times as there I was in a very unique situation, something I did not expect to happen, and here it is. It took place. It's just one of those moments that you can remember. Maybe some of you have had unique moments in your life experience of interacting with other creatures, your dog or your cat, or maybe even something out in the wild. Well, one of the ladies in our church had another very unique experience just this last week, and it had to do with a hummingbird. Now, y'all know that hummingbirds are a very unique creation. I mean, how they fly basically gave impetus to the inventors of helicopters because they could see this little bird was raising vertical, then it could go horizontal. I guess it could even can fly upside down and backwards. A very unique portion of God's creation. And they use all sorts of energy, in just being able to fly. It's amazing. I don't have all the stats now, but I can remember reading in some journal that was talking about the life of a hummingbird and how many calories it has to take, how many beats of its wing to keep it flying. And it's an amazing little critter. And they're extremely beautiful. I know we have some around here in the house that come by, and we've got some little feeders out there in the backyard, or we watch them come to some of the flowers in our yard, and we don't have that many currently. But in the house that we used to live in, we had quite a number of different, what they call hummingbird attractants. In other words, they're flowers that the hummingbirds enjoy coming to because they can get the nectar they want and enjoy their life. But understand what happened here with this interaction of this lady and a hummingbird. and what it means, I think there is a story. There is actually what I would call a prophetic meaning of life in this story. Well, our friend all of a sudden walked into her garage. It was somewhat dark, and she heard this little fluttering, and she looked over, and there was a butterfly that was encased in cobwebs. It had it all over, it had it over its body, over its wings. And so she didn't know exactly, what to do, how to approach it. She didn't know if the hummingbird was alive or dead. And she went up and she picked it up, and she could see that there was a little heartbeat going on. So very carefully, she began to take off the cobwebs that were restricting the flight of the hummingbird. She said there wasn't a lot, but it was enough that this small, fragile bird could not maintain its flight. So she carefully removed all the cobwebs that she could see, and it looked like it was fine. And she just held the hummingbird in her hand, and then the hummingbird took off. Now they were still in the garage, and the garage was still somewhat darkened. All of a sudden, she heard this light little thud, and she said, "Oh my, what has happened?" Well, she looked and she could see very quickly off to the side that the hummingbird had got wrapped in some more of the cobwebs in the garage, and instead of falling down at a place where she could easily get to the hummingbird or even see the hummingbird, it had fallen into a space that was between the garage wall and some other items that were being stored in the garage. And it was difficult for her to get to it. But she was able to just kind of push her way and kind of said, "Well, I can't really move everything." But she said, "I could get my hand down behind behind the area that was restricting the movement of the hummingbird and the wall." And she put her hand down very, very carefully and was able to feel her way and feel the hummingbird. And so she very carefully picked up the hummingbird and put it in her hand. This time, when she looked, the hummingbird was encased in even more cobwebs, denser, heavier, and more restrictive in its flight, that she was really concerned whether she could even get the cobwebs off the body of the hummingbird so it could remove all of the areas that would cause it to be bound and restricted from the freedom in its life that it was used to. But she said the hummingbird just lay there, and she very carefully removed the cobwebs from around it. It was around its wings, around a portion of its face and beak, over its chest. I mean, she said it was just encased in this cobweb. But she was able to get it off. And now, she said, I opened the door to the garage even that much more than it had been before, because she had only opened it just a little bit, and she expected that on the first release that the hummingbird would have flown to the light, to the outside. But I guess it was confused. It might have even been dazed from its fall, and it didn't make it. And so then it fell into a very much of a worse situation. But this time she opened up the door and she went outside, held out her hand, and very quickly the hummingbird picked itself up. It flew out of her hand. She said it turned around and looked at me, and then it took off. It was free. It was gone. But she had done her part. She had done her part to see that this hummingbird was going to live. Now, what is the portion that I want to have you understand about this event, how it affects your own life? And this is what a number of us saw as we discussed this event. You know, there's a lot of things that we don't see in life that can entrap us, just like a cobweb for this hummingbird. You know, cobwebs, if you look at them, sometimes they don't look like there's anything there at all. It's kind of a misty look, and you're really surprised. And you know, if you've ever gone outside through the forest or through the woods or whatever, and all of a sudden you look up and you've got a cobweb, you know, running across your face, and maybe you were looking into the sunlight in a certain way. You never saw it coming, but there it was. It had run into you, or you had run into it. Now, it didn't restrict your movement, but it was not easy for you to see, just like the hummingbird probably didn't see it coming, but it got trapped. And that first entrapment was not that serious in the scope of everything. And there was a person to come along and remove what the restrictions were, and the hummingbird was free again. And maybe there's been a time in your life where you had some minor problems, and somebody came alongside of you and they helped you through that situation. You got free from whatever was restricting you. But then you went a little bit farther in your life and you didn't see what was coming. Maybe you were blinded by the facts, or blinded by an expectation that was not real. The reality was not what it should have been. And this time, the challenge was that much more. It was so restricted, you wondered whether you were even going to be able to move forward. It might have been even so restricted that you were even fearful for your own life. But yet, again, somebody comes along and they see your situation and they come along and they begin to unravel. They begin to unravel the things that have been challenging you, restricting you, even harming you. And you see, that's what God has for each one of us. He has people that can come into our lives totally unexpected, just like this hummingbird. I'm sure it never had a reaction and never anticipated that a human being would come and free it from a very challenging situation. But you know, there's a lot of situations we find ourselves in that we think maybe, well, just maybe in my own strength, I can get out of it. But you can't. You need somebody to come alongside of you, somebody that will guide you and give you direction to move forward so you can be free of those binding elements, those stronghold elements that are holding you back from the freedom that God has created you for. You might have been in a situation where you thought it was so dark that nobody would ever find you. Nobody would ever come to your rescue. But here it is. The lady in our church was willing to stick her hand down into the darkness where she really couldn't see what was going on. And she was able to feel her way and gently remove the hummingbird so she could begin to work with it. Maybe you've been into one of those dark situations where you needed somebody. You couldn't see any light, you couldn't see any way out of it. But perhaps you began to pray, bring somebody, and help me. And you know, God hears those prayers. Sometimes people have said, well, it's like a flare prayer. It just goes up as a flare into the air of saying, I need a rescue. I need a rescue. When I was in the Air Force, we had rescue flares. If we were to go down, there was a certain time if we were to be in a situation where we could be captured by the enemy, that we didn't want to fire those things. But we got the word that we were going to be rescued, and we needed to pop a very quick flare to give our position to a rescuing helicopter, perhaps, that would come in and lift us out of the situation. So, you know, flare prayers have a very great impact on your life. And maybe today, after you're hearing this story about a hummingbird that needed somebody to come and rescue it, not once from a light situation, but a second time into a situation that was even perhaps more devastating or had the potential of being more devastating, totally life threatening to this hummingbird. I don't know what your challenge is today, but go ahead and send up a prayer that God will send somebody into your life that is willing and able to work with you and to release you from the things that bind you. So I'm saying, thank you, Lord, that you hear our prayers, that you are mindful of a hummingbird. You were mindful of a butterfly. And just as you are mindful of the sparrows, as it says in Scripture, as Jesus shared, how much more do you care for us and to meet our needs and our desires and to see that we receive your goodness and mercy, which are promised to be eternal. This is Douglas Allen Frazier sharing a story about a hummingbird and you and what it can mean to your life. We'll see you next time on By My Spirit. God bless you all. Okay. Now.